Chapter 29. After 2 grueling months of research, tracking, questioning, and interrogating, Master Plo Koon finally found most of the answers he had been searching for. It took a long time to track down the 2 bounty-hunting brothers who had successfully spirited young Zekalov away from the heavily guarded clone triage facility by cleverly switching the boy with a changeling. They truthfully confirmed that they had been the ones to have done so, but as bounty hunters they were protected by a guild who had successfully managed to pass a law through the Senate that gave them full immunity to incarceration or punishment so long as their bounties were not killed or harmed in any way. Unfortunately, in addition to that law, there existed a statute that also protected the confidentiality of the individual who hired those bounty hunters. How that law and statute were successfully approved in the Senate was beyond the Jedi's understanding. Master Plo had a feeling that there was something else at work. Something dark and sinister, perhaps a lurking danger that was not yet ready to reveal itself. He sometimes thought he heard whispers, warnings, emanating through the Force. Whoever hired those bounty hunters wanted to remain anonymous and untraceable. A few Jedi Council members suggested during one of their meetings that the employer had most likely been an agent for Count Dooku, or perhaps the Count himself. Since it had been obviously proven that Zekalov had not been harmed, the 2 bounty hunters could not be imprisoned, punished, or detained. So the Jedi Council soon dropped the matter entirely and resumed their hunt for the Sith fugitive, Zekalov Quilamek Sheelal. The law that the Senate approved had, of course, infuriated Anakin Skywalker. The young man secretly pleaded with Padme to find some way to amend that law, insisting that the 2 bounty hunters who rescued Zekalov from his imprisonment be charged as accessories to Ahsoka's murder. Padme, of course, was in no position to alter such an extreme law. At least, not on her own. She would need Chancellor Palpatine's approval and a unanimous vote in the Senate before any changes could be made. So Anakin immediately went to see the Chancellor and told him of his plight. The elderly man simply placed a fatherly hand on his shoulder and apologized, saying that the law in question could not be nullified or revised for another 3 years due to the timestamp associated with it. In desperation, Anakin sought out his master, only to run into yet another dead end. Obi-Wan Kenobi tried to kindly remind Anakin that Ahsoka's demise was not on the account of murder, since she chose to willingly engage in a dueling match against the Sith apprentice. So now Anakin Skywalker was currently taking the law into his own hands. He decided it would be a good idea to visit Zekalov's homeworld first. Perhaps there he could find answers that the Jedi archives failed to yield and hopefully provide him with a new lead as to Zekalov's current whereabouts. It was a long shot, but he had to try. He would be very discreet, of course, and operate undercover with a false identity and would leave anything tying him to the Jedi far behind him. He knew what his master Obi-Wan would say and could practically see Kenobi's disapproving frown. "Your lightsaber is your life, Anakin. How many times must I tell you, not to lose it?" Well, technically he wasn't losing it. He was purposefully leaving it behind. He boarded his ship, the Twilight, and paused once he seated himself in the pilot's chair. A lump formed in his throat and unshed tears filled his eyes as memories of Ahsoka surfaced as he glanced longingly at the empty co-pilot's seat next to him. Sometimes he could still picture her, clear as day, smiling and laughing as they joked and bantered as they often had. Sometimes, he could almost hear her voice. The loss of his Padawan left yet another empty hole in his heart. First the death of his mother, now the aftermath of Ahsoka's. He immediately pushed those memories aside and began his pre-flight and takeoff sequence. He didn't forget his promise to the Sith boy to uncover the truth regarding the fate of Kali and his origins. Anakin was going to keep that promise, no matter how enraged he was at the youth. No, he was not going to kill the boy. He knew in his heart that such a course of action was not what Ahsoka would have wanted. He was going to capture Zekalov. The Kalish boy was going to receive due punishment for his crimes against the Republic. Anakin Skywalker made it out beyond Coruscant's atmosphere and immediately punched in the coordinates for Kali and made the jump to hyperspace. Zekalov finally docked with his father's flagship, the Invisible Hand, after his 5-hour-long trip. He left Sith Lord Razor's artifacts on board his personal ship, the Dark Shadow. The young warrior immediately reported to his father, who filled him in on present circumstances. So the Jedi were hunting for him. That honestly didn't surprise the teen. Once General Grievous finished relaying Dooku's report, he eyed his son suspiciously. His boy appeared to have changed in some way. He couldn't quite put a metal digit on what it was exactly, but he was not shy to question him about it. Zekalov, what happened on Korriban? I'm afraid it's a matter I'm not at liberty to discuss, Father. The details regarding my mission are meant for Dooku and him alone. I'm sorry. Zekalov bowed his head with a hand over his heart, in a show of reverent respect. He displayed a great deal of maturity and wisdom. More so than he had before his departure to the infamous Sith planet. Grievous nodded slightly, although his golden eyes held a glimmer of curiosity. I understand. Zekalov's demeanor shifted into one of all seriousness then. Where are the clone prisoners and what is their condition? Each one of them has remained in isolation. They have been given their daily supply of nutrients, some more forcefully than others due to their rather defiant nature, but have otherwise remained unharmed as you wished. Grievous broke down into a brief, hacking cough. After the Kaleesh warlord recovered himself, he gently gave his son a pat on the back while minutely nodding his head. I leave them in your capable hands. Do what must be done. Show no mercy, Grievous growled through his mask. I understand, Father. The cyborg Kaleesh then turned around and stalked away. Zekalov heavily sighed and then headed down towards the detention block, all the while remembering and considering what Sith Lord Razor had discussed with him on Korriban. After retrieving his lightsaber, the young Kaleesh went to the nearest detention block security station and gave the droids currently keeping watch over the clones explicit instructions. Bring all of the prisoners out of isolation and into the torture chamber immediately. He watched the droids with a sharp eye as they carried out his orders. Zekalov knew that his father would be watching him through the live security feed in the room. The young warrior knew that to show the clones any mercy would in essence be signing his own death warrant. The young Kaleesh for now would have to grudgingly play the role of merciless Sith apprentice. He would obey every command given to him from both his father and Darth Tyrannus until the day finally came, for him to enact his revenge upon his master and ultimately free himself from the Sith. Zekalov wordlessly followed the droids that half carried and half dragged the 5 clone prisoners into the dimly lit room. His keen eyes swept over the captives and he immediately began to assess their current condition. The 5 clones were chained up and looked weak, malnourished, defeated, and utterly broken as they met his gaze with dull eyes devoid of hope. Zekalov removed his battle mask since there was no need to keep his identity secret since the clones had seen his face months ago when they attacked him. He casually clasped his hands behind his back and began to slowly pace before them. Do you know why you are here? The clones remained silent since the question was rhetorical. The young Kaleesh warrior subtly inclined his head and narrowed his golden, reptilian eyes as he rephrased the question. Do you know why you have been kept alive thus far? Rusty spat in the direction of Zekalov's left boot but missed. Zekalov raised an eye ridge with an amused smirk. General Grievous wishes for me to prolong your lives so that you may suffer immeasurable pain and ceaseless torture at my hands. Personally, I've grown rather bored of this game and desire to put you all out of your misery. Unfortunately for you, my father is watching us now as I speak via surveillance cam. There are but one of 2 choices to make. To prove to you that I am not as heartless as you perceive me to be, I shall demonstrate a democracy by allowing each of you to cast a vote. Zekalov paused as he set his lightsaber and one of the clones' DC-15 blaster rifles on a table beside him from across the room. Here are your options. 1. I walk away, free of guilt, with my hands clean of your blood and force General Grievous to do far worse than anything I could possibly imagine doing to you. Or option 2. Zekalov paused as he evenly met the despondent gazes of each surviving member of Renegade's squad with a grim face. The clones were more than surprised that the young Kalish warrior standing in front of them wasn't as thirsty for their blood as he had been 2 weeks previously. They kept silent as they waited for the boy to finish speaking. I allow you to suffer the relatively quick deaths that you all have been wishing for. Granted, it will be tragic and will bring you great pain, but nowhere near as agonizing a demise as Grievous would have in store for you. I will give you exactly 1 minute to decide. Zekalov turned his back on them as he fingered the edges and grooves of the DC-15 battle rifle with one clawed digit. He tuned out the harsh, bickering whispers between the clones as they furiously deliberated their final course of action. A small smile tugged at the corners of his lips when the one named Avalanche announced their verdict a few seconds later. We have voted accordingly and our decision has been made. We have agreed to pursue whatever fate you have in store for us as you promised, in regards to option number 2. A wise decision, Zekalov nodded as he turned back around to face them. He briskly walked over and unchained Rusty. There is but one rule you must follow. Do not, in any way, dare to attack or retaliate against me, or I will deliver you into the eager hands of my father and disregard our conversation and our agreement. Understood? The 5 clones nodded grimly as they finally accepted their fate. Very good, Zekalov nodded as he retrieved both his red lightsaber and the blaster from the table. He clipped the lightsaber to his belt and handed the blaster rifle to Rusty and then proceeded to unchain Skids. He gestured for Skids to stand against the far, east wall and then stood back so that Rusty and Skids had a direct line of sight with one another. I've given you this blaster for a single purpose. I'm sure you are already aware of what that is. Rusty's eyes went wide and he shook his head.
No, I can't.
Zekalov gave him a single warning, one that the rest of Renegade's squad would take to heart, if they truly wanted to save each other in the only way they knew how. If clone camaraderie is as true as I hear it is, you wouldn't want to put your brothers in harm's way, now would you? Defy my order and you can be certain that disobeying my command will make your team suffer unimaginable horror. We all knew someday it would come to this. Just pull the trigger, Rusty. Skids nodded. The leader of Renegade's squad shook his head as the hint of tears glimmered in his eyes. I can't. With those words, he dropped the blaster rifle to the ground with a loud clatter. Zekalov shook his head in disappointment. Using the force, he pulled the blaster rifle into his awaiting hands. Your inability to execute your squad mate will now result with their agonizing torture and slow, inhumane execution. Congratulations, clone leader, instead of saving your brethren, you've just betrayed and killed them in the most cowardly way imaginable. The Kalish warrior turned his back on the clones and slowly began to march up the steps that would lead him back out into the hallway, but Rusty screamed after him. Wait. I'm sorry. Please, I'm begging you. Give me another chance, I promise I'll do it. Zekalov paused mid-stride and then partially turned his head around to look at Rusty through his peripheral vision as he appeared to be considering his words. You have broken your oath and in so doing, have made our agreement nullified. Why should I grant you your request? Rusty's voice cracked as he desperately pleaded with him. Because, I'm responsible. I'm the one who wanted revenge against your father. I'm the one who coerced the others to join me in order to kidnap, abuse, and nearly kill you. They were just following my orders. So the consequences rest with me and me alone. I understand now what you require of me and I promise to fulfill your terms if you grant me this second chance. Zekalov turned completely around to regard the renegade leader and eventually nodded his head. You make a compelling case. Very well. I will grant you one last opportunity. Should you fail again, there will be no hope of mercy. I promise. Rusty seemed to sag with relief. Now do as I previously ordered. Execute your comrade. Yes, sir. Rusty took aim at Skids, whose face had gone pale, and squeezed the trigger. On reflex, Skids leapt out of the way and avoided the shot entirely. He hit the floor and covered his head, no doubt due to his deeply ingrained combat training. Zekalov cursed when he realized he missed that crucial detail. Damn. I forgot you clones were programmed with that reflex action. We will do this once more, but we'll do it right. Zikalov roughly hauled Skids back up to his feet by the scruff of his tattered and blood-stained undershirt and shoved him back into place. He then went to stand beside Rusty. The Kalish then unsheathed both of his father's swords, and just as he had done within the Tomb of Razor, he shrew first one and then the other end over end until they embedded themselves deeply within both of Skid's shoulders, pinning him to the wall. The clone screamed in agony. The accuracy and critical position of where the twin swords had struck made it impossible for the helpless clone to remove them of his own volition. Zikalov stepped back to give Rusty room. The leader of Renegade's squad once again took aim, although his hands shook as his resolve to terminate his friend briefly wavered. Skids was already sobbing and moaning from the agony his wounds were causing him. He finally shouted at Rusty in raw desperation. "What are you waiting for? Just pull the damn trigger." Rusty got his shaking under control and carefully aimed the red-dotted sight on Skid's forehead. Sweat beaded on his brow and began to drip down the side of his face. He choked on a sob as his finger finally squeezed the firing pin. Skids was killed instantly and hung limply from where Zikalov's twin blades had kept him mercilessly impaled against the wall. Rusty sagged to his knees and watched as the blaster rifle in his hands slowly slid out of his numb grasp to land on the floor in front of him with an angry clatter. He looked at his shaking hands with eyes wide in complete denial. What had he done? It was in that moment that Rusty attempted to rationalize and justify his actions. Skids had been suffering, so he had done the honorable and noble deed of putting him out of his misery. He was the only one who could give his squad the quick deaths they deserved. Right? He shuddered to think what horrors Grievous would have done to them otherwise had he chosen to rebel against Zikalov's order entirely. That heartless cyborg would have in all probability gone so far as to slowly rip one of his men limb from limb. Zikalov ordered Rusty to remove Skid's body from the newly marked execution line as the young Kalish retrieved his father's twin swords. He wiped the blood off of them with a wet rag nearby and sheathed them. He looked at the remaining 3 clones apart from Rusty with all seriousness. "Unless you want to end up like your friend over there, I suggest that when your turn finally comes, you remain stationary." The Kalish warrior felt a slight disturbance in the force. His father was watching, and was obviously not pleased with his methods. So Zikalov went to where Rusty was kneeling on the floor and grabbed the baster rifle. He ripped the scope clean off with his cybernetic hands and made a few simple adjustments with the tools on the workbench nearby. Zikalov also used discarded scrap metal to fashion crude binders to keep the clones attached to the wall. He then unchained Clapper and roughly shoved him to the line. With swift, precise movements, Zikalov grabbed each of the clones' wrists and raised them up to where the binders had been welded into the wall and cuffed him. "I'm afraid you're next. Sorry to say that your demise may not be as quick as your former comrade's was." "You are a monster," Clapper softly declared. Zikalov growled as he wrapped a duranium hand around the clone's throat and lightly squeezed. With icy eyes he hissed his response. "I have granted you clones far more mercy than what the Separatists and the Sith allow. You say that I'm a monster? I assure you, a monster lives in everyone. You proved that the day you mercilessly beat and tortured an innocent child, the day you tried to kill me. You are all responsible for bringing that monster to life, within me, and within yourselves." Zikalov released Clapper from his chokehold and then went across the room. He kicked Rusty in the leg to snap him out of his dazed stupor and dropped the rifle back into his hands. "You have 3 more executions to perform. I suggest you return to your firing position." Rusty stood up with haunted eyes as he looked at the remaining survivors of his squad. He swallowed the thick lump that formed in his throat as he turned to regard them. He found it incredibly difficult to speak since his mouth felt as though someone had shoved a wad of cotton in his mouth. Perhaps their executions were a mercy. They were all starved, dehydrated, and still retained unhealed wounds that were bad enough to warrant some form of medical attention. They obviously weren't going to get any, even if their lives had been extended another 3 days. With tears forming in his eyes, he choked out the words he was so desperately trying to say. "I'm so sorry, my brothers. Please forgive me." He then focused his full attention on Clapper and aimed the blaster rifle. He squinted an eye as he attempted to line up the shot. The loss of the scope made it incredibly difficult to gauge any true accuracy as he looked down the line of the barrel. The first shot wildly missed. Clapper began to shake as his eyes betrayed the true terror he was feeling. Rusty paused and looked at his comrade. "Close your eyes, Clapper. Think back to our days at the academy. Remember how terrible the cafeteria food was, and how we started that food fight." Rusty squeezed off a second shot, which hit Clapper's left leg. His scream made Renegade's squad grimace. Avalanche looked away while Swift held his hands over his ears, rocking back and forth in his anxiety. Rusty did his best, tried with all his power to put a quick end to his brother's suffering, but since Zekalov tampered with the damn gun, it was near impossible to get a clean shot. It was after the third blaster bolt, which struck Clapper's right shoulder, that the clone leader angrily whirled on the Kalish teen. "Damn it, boy. How the hell am I supposed to execute my squad with a sabotaged gun? You promised that our deaths would be quick." Zekalov leaned casually back against a wall with his arms crossed, and with a frown he shrugged. "It shouldn't take more than 5 to 10 minutes for each member of your squad to expire. That is, if you stop prolonging their suffering and just carry on. Grievous would have made your deaths excruciating, intimate, and incredibly slow. And by his standards, the definition of slow is measured in days. Do you still believe I'm treating you unfairly?" Rusty clenched his jaw in rage and was tempted to shoot the Kalish teen, but he saw the severe, warning flash in the boy's eyes and remembered their agreement. He grudgingly growled with a slow shake of his head. "No. You are not." "Then please continue," Zekalov ordered with a dismissive wave. Rusty aimed again with tears in his eyes. He clenched his jaw again and used his anger to fuel his resolve. He tried to picture his comrade as a battle droid, but with every scream, the illusion was shattered. "Clapper, remember our home? Remember Camino? The steady, soothing sound of rain, the few times we would disobey orders and sneak outside as kids just to feel the fresh water running through our hair and down our faces. Those were the days." Clapper weakly mumbled as his labored breathing revealed the depths of his pain. Rusty nodded from where he stood a few yards away and gave Clapper a gesture, tapping the side of his head. "Close your eyes and think of those days." Clapper closed his eyes and furrowed his brows as if in deep thought. "You know, I really did hate all that rain." Rusty fired the gun several times, praying his comrade's misery would finally end. With every blaster round, the self-loathing that had begun to blossom in his heart kindled into a burning flame. Rusty hated himself and could hardly bear to look his brother in the eyes with every deliberate pull of the trigger. It took 3 additional blaster rounds to end Clapper's life. One shot grazed the side of his head, and finally the last 2 ripped through his chest. The renegade leader breathed a sigh of relief once Clapper passed on into the next realm. Once the deceased clone was free from the binders, his lifeless body was dragged to lay beside Skid's. All too soon, it was Swift's turn. He was shaking uncontrollably when he was unchained. As both Zekalov and Rusty began to drag him, he finally cracked and began kicking and screaming, "No. I don't want to die. Not like this. Not like this," Swift cried as he began to hyperventilate once his wrists were bound to the wall. Rusty's resolve to continue his role as squad executioner wavered. His already broken heart felt like it was shattering with Swift's every plea. Swift was the youngest clone in their squad. This was not a fair end for them, but Rusty knew all too well that there were far worse ways to die. With a rough slap, he finally got Swift to shut up. Swift looked at him with wide-eyed confusion. Rusty's expression turned into one of all seriousness as he suddenly reverted back to his original leadership role. "That's enough, trooper. We knew this day would come. We were sentenced to die on Coruscant for our crimes, remember? By all rights we should have died months ago. You are finally about to be free, brother. No more pain. No more suffering. No war. No grief. Think on that and nothing else. Can you do that? Swift looked at him with wide eyes and vigorously nodded his head, although he couldn't stop his body from trembling. He began to hyperventilate when Rusty walked across the room and raised the blaster rifle at him. "Close your eyes, Swift," Rusty softly commanded. Swift did as he was told, but he continued to choke on sobs as tears managed to squeeze out of the corners of his tightly shut eyes. Suddenly, a smooth, soothing voice filled the air. Avalanche softly began to sing, a song that they learned from one of the Mandalorians who had overseen their training on Kamino. The words were in Mandoa, but even so, to Zikalov's surprise, he found the melody and the foreign words to be calming, even to him. It seemed to have a very positive effect on Swift, for the clone had stopped shaking and was no longer sobbing. Swift's face slowly became peaceful as he intently listened to the farewell song Avalanche was singing on his behalf. "Hush now, my brother, be silent, be still. Your peace has now come, your mission fulfilled. Warrior, true warrior, your fight is now done. Fear not, my brother, this battle we've won." Rusty too seemed more at ease as he once again aimed the gun and prepared to pull the trigger. He waited, hoping and praying that Swift's death would be quick. It would take a miracle, but maybe they would get lucky this time. The renegade leader would have joined in, but he knew that if he even attempted it, his voice would crack from the emotional whirlwind he felt within his heart. He was a little relieved when Swift found his voice long enough to join in the melody while he could. Rusty's finger curled around the trigger and he slowed his breathing as he aimed his eye down the length of the barrel while Avalanche continued to sing, his voice rising and falling, sounding both haunting and lamentful. "Free of this hell, safe from the flames. Fly far away, forget all your pain. Hush now, my brother, be brave and be true. The war is now past, it's over for you. My brother, dear brother, take strength from your kin. Your courage and valor ensured that we'll win." Rusty fired. With a flash of searing, red light, the blaster bolt hit Swift in the chest, but unfortunately it was not a fatal shot. He internally cursed and was damn near ready to take the gun and shoot himself in the head when Swift screamed and opened his eyes to stare at him with an expression of immeasurable pain as tears silently ran down his cheeks. Rusty's face contorted into one of emotional agony. "I'm so sorry, Swift," listened to Avalanche. "Close your eyes and listen to your brother's song." Swift's breathing had become shallow and his eyes closed in response to Rusty's command. Avalanche's voice echoed through the large expanse of the nearly empty room. "I'll remember you, brother, eternal you'll be. I'm here with you now, you're right next to me. Brother, my brother, hear this, my song. You'll never, ever, truly be gone. We'll all just be marching, far, far away. Goodbye, my brave brother, I wish you could stay. Maybe, just maybe, we'll meet once again, once we're marching, forever and ever away." With one last blaster shot, Rusty finally succeeded in giving Swift the quick death that he deserved. Avalanche watched as Rusty and Zikalov unlocked the binders that had kept Swift's arms clasped to the wall with grief evident on his face. Unshed tears gleamed in his eyes, but he didn't allow them to fall. Unlike his brethren, he did not cry, plead, scream, or beg. He did not appear nearly as afraid as the others had been. In fact, he seemed to be the only one at peace as he accepted his fate. He closed his eyes and lowered his head. He began to sing the farewell song again as he heard the telltale sound of an ammo cartridge being ejected from the blaster rifle. Rusty looked over at Zikalov with an upturned palm. "I need another ammo cartridge. I'm out." Zikalov frowned and shook his head. "I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't have any spares laying around. Improvise." Rusty appeared to be at a loss as he searched the room for another weapon but came up empty. Zikalov made a suggestion. "There's a blaster over there that once belonged to a B-1 battle droid." Rusty's eyes rested on the separatist gun. His expression grew dark and he pointed a finger at it and growled at the Kalish boy. "I'm not killing my brother with an enemy gun. That would be nothing short of a disgrace." The young Kalish warrior tossed a sheathed knife in Rusty's direction. The renegade leader caught it and stared at the boy. "You've got to be kidding me. You will either use that or I will use this to execute your comrade for you." Zikolov tapped his lightsaber in warning. Rusty nodded in defeat and dropped the blaster rifle with a clatter. He slowly approached Avalanche, whose eyes were still closed. The clone had stopped singing and appeared to be silently waiting for the inevitable. "I'm so sorry, Avalanche, forgive me." That was when Rusty began to sing to the best of his ability. "Sing with me, brother," he whispered with grief in his eyes. Soon two near-identical voices rose in harmony together. The farewell song continued as Rusty finally found the inner courage and strength to do what needed to be done. Without further hesitation, he quickly rammed the knife through Avalanche's chest where it pierced his heart. The dying clone gasped and stared into Rusty's eyes wordlessly for a moment as he listened to the last few words of the song. He gave Rusty a small smile. "Forgiveness is yours, my brother," he managed to wheeze out with his dying breath. Soon the light faded from Avalanche's eyes and his head lowered as the last of his life slipped away. Rusty, lost in despair, pressed his fingers against Avalanche's neck to check for a pulse, even though he knew he wasn't going to find one. No. No, 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 no. Rusty began to panic as grief and guilt slowly consumed him. Rusty soon dropped the knife and fell to his knees. He raised his head to the ceiling and screamed in both grief and rage as the gravity of his actions finally hit home. His entire squad, his friends, his comrades, his brothers, were all dead now because of him. He killed them. He went and knelt next to their bodies, weeping and whispered a Mandalorian farewell. Returse IV, ne vods. Zikolov pushed himself away from the wall and went to stand a few feet from Rusty. "You did well." Rusty didn't grace him with a response and instead gave him stone, cold silence. His slumped shoulders and defeated posture revealed just how broken he had truly become. "Now how do you prefer to die, Rusty?" The clone sat motionless as if he hadn't heard him. Then without warning, he sprang to his feet and backed away, holding the knife still dripping with the spilled blood of his clone brother Avalanche, and held it to his own throat. "Not at your hands. I'll die by my own." Zikolov shook his head sadly and using the force, he pulled the knife out of Rusty's grip and caught the handle in his outstretched hand. "Unfortunately, I can't allow you to do that. At least not on your own." Zikolov's eyes grew soft. He made a subtle gesture towards the security cam on the ceiling. Rusty remained silent while his eyes glanced briefly upwards. He then turned his bloodshot eyes on the boy with a frown. "What do you have in mind? You are going to kill yourself. My way." Zikolov retrieved the droid's blaster and tossed it in Rusty's direction. The clone caught it and stared at the Kalish teen with complete distrust. "Why are you doing this?" "Truthfully, because I must keep up the ridiculous ruse that I'm completely heartless, merciless, and nothing short of an evil monster, as you clones so eloquently put it. I'm a dead man walking if I don't make your death look like murder. Consider what I'm doing, a merciful form of euthanasia. I will make it look like I forced you to kill yourself. All you have to do is play your part as the terrified victim and all will be well. After what you just made me do, why in the seven hells would I want to help you now?" Rusty scoffed with bitter disdain. Zikolov's face turned grim as he partially turned to gesture to the entrance of the cell. "Because Rusty, in about 30 seconds, my father will be walking through that door." Both of the current living occupants in the torture chamber stiffened when they heard the telltale and clearly unmistakable clanking sound of clawed uranium feet echoing from down the hall. Zikolov grabbed Rusty's shirt collar and yanked him forward so that he was mere inches from his face. "You better be believable, Rusty, because if you're not, he's going to kill you himself." Chapter 30. "Okay, here he comes," Zikolov hissed as he shoved Rusty away from the door towards the center of the room. Using the force, he lifted the clone into the air until the prisoner was dangling 3 feet from the floor. "What if this doesn't work?" Rusty whispered frantically. Shut up. I'll think of something if it doesn't. Now play your part. Rusty screamed as if he was suffering a torture method of unimaginable magnitude. No matter how prepared they felt, it did nothing to alleviate the pure, adrenaline-rushing fear once the torture room door swooshed open, revealing the large, hulking form of General Grievous. Zekalov pretended to ignore his father and did everything in his power to look and sound like the Sith apprentice he was trained to be. I promised you that I would save your execution for last. Would you desire slow and agonizing? Or extremely slow and excruciating? Zekalov laughed wickedly as he lightly force-choked Rusty. Of course the clone was quite able to breathe and did just as the boy instructed only moments ago. He widened his eyes and clawed at the invisible hands that were supposedly strangling him. He choked and spluttered after Zekalov released him about a minute later and cried out in pain when he landed heavily on the unforgiving durasteel floor. The clone inhaled ragged, gasping breaths as he rubbed at his neck as though he could still feel those invisible hands wrapped around his throat. His whole body was quaking once the clone finally took notice of General Grievous's surprise entry. Rusty scrambled backwards to distance himself from the intimidating general of the droid armies. For a few seconds, the room was bathed in silence as all three occupants in the room studied and evaluated each other. Zekalov saw the burning flame within his father's golden, reptilian eyes and internally cringed. Whenever his father had that look, death and destruction always followed. Or in Zekalov's case, a furious scolding and the promise of a punishment for his inherent lack of bloodlust. General Grievous stalked further into the room, his rage palpable, and snarled at his son through his droid-like mask. I gave you a simple task. You were to show these clones no mercy. Yet you failed. By allowing that vermin, Grievous growled with deep loathing as he pointed at Rusty, to execute his own squad. That is unacceptable. You were meant to kill them yourself. Zekalov gave his father an icy glare, one that rivaled that of the general himself, and held up one hand to halt any further advances, both verbal and physical. His voice lowered into a menacing, hateful tone. These clones were mine to do with as I pleased. You have no right to tell me I failed. I have every right. Grievous thundered as he took a menacing step towards his son. The boy needed to remember his place. The cyborg Kalish in past years only needed to warn his child once, and that warning was issued when the little one spent his first week with him aboard the Invisible Hand. He never thought he'd have to do so again. The boy was known to be very well behaved. Zekalov was to follow his every command while he lived within the confines of the warship. It was time the child received a reminder. You want me to be merciless, father? You want to see what I can really do? Zekalov's voice turned murderously dark. Zekalov tossed a droid's blaster pistol down and watched as it slid to a stop at Rusty's feet. The clone dropped his act a while ago when he realized that what was now taking place was not at all a part of their elaborate plan. Now he had no choice but to improvise. What did you expect me to do with this? He scoffed. The Kalish teen crossed his arms over his chest with a frown. Pick it up. You shall see. Zekalov ordered. When his father wasn't looking at him, the Kalish teen gave Rusty a small wink. Hopefully the clone would be able to decipher the meaning of such an action. The former leader of Renegade's squad frowned and eyed the weapon distrustfully. Why should I? Pick it up. Zekalov responded with a death glare, emphasizing each word with an aggravated growl. Zekalov suppressed a sigh of relief when he noticed that his father's foul mood mildly abated. That relief blossomed when he sensed his father's mounting curiosity, stemming his impulse to shed blood as the life-threatening drama continued to unfold. The clone prisoner grudgingly retrieved the weapon with a scowl. What the hell kind of a sick game is this? The blaster pistol in your hand has not been tampered with in any way. I estimate that in about. Zekalov paused and looked at the chronometer attached to his wrist and then continued, 60 seconds you will be dead. I want to give you a little parting gift, something that I know you've wished for since the moment you stepped foot on this ship. Enact your revenge, Rusty. If only to make yourself feel better. Rusty's eyes darted from the pistol in his hand and then to each of his captors. He began to nervously laugh. Then it briefly escalated into a confusing uproar. Seconds later, his maniacal laughter changed from innocent to absolute madness. Rusty sneered at Grievous with an edge of insanity gleaming in his eyes as he pointed the blaster at him. His cracked and bleeding lips parted to reveal stained teeth, as his lust for revenge spread across his face in the form of a murderous smile. Zekalov gave his father a hard look and an accompanying hand signal, silently telling him to stand down and simply observe. "I damn you, Grievous, I damn you to hell." Rusty raged as he quickly fired a rapid succession of 5 blaster rounds. Zekalov was quite impressed with the clone's charade. Rusty could have been an infamous movie star in another life. The Sith apprentice easily anticipated the clone's reaction. Just as Rusty lightly squeezed the firing pin, Zekalov used a subtle hand gesture, using the force to gently nudge the blaster that was tightly held within the clone's grasp. All ammo rounds missed, having been forcefully misdirected. The aftermath of his failed assassination attempt was comical. The clone stared almost dumbly at the black scorch marks on the wall to their right and then down at the pistol. He examined it with confusion and scratched the back of his head as though he had no idea why he missed. He even went so far as to shake it and held it to his ear, half expecting to hear a rattling sound that would indicate a defect of some sort. "Is this another one of your clever tricks, Roy?" Rusty frowned with disgust. "No. I just enjoy giving you clones false hope, you're all so gullible," Zekalov snickered. General Grievous could stand it no longer. His already thin patience finally expired. "No more fun and games. You will kill this clone right now without mercy, or I will see that both he and you suffer for your failure." Grievous leveled an even glare on his son as he growled out his warning with a sharply pointed talon. What Grievous said did rattle Rusty a little, but he remained in character. He saw Zekalov's wink earlier and hoped he was right in assuming it meant he was to continue with his roleplay. Rusty was currently clueless as to what the Kalish teen had in mind, but he did know that if he was going to obtain even the slightest chance of avoiding death at Grievous's hands, he would have to trust him. He still wasn't sure why the boy was helping him. "You want to see Merciless?" Zekalov sneered rather darkly. The Kalish teen outstretched a hand in the clone's direction. Rusty scrambled to his feet, the blaster pistol still in his right hand, and widened his eyes when he felt the pistol slowly moving up as though someone had their hand on it. What are you doing?" The clone began to scream and beg when he realized what was happening. He struggled in vain to pull his arm back down, even trying to pry the gun out of his grasp with his other hand, but was clearly no longer in control. All too soon, the gun came to rest against the side of Rusty's head. The clone's frightened and despairing cries fell on deaf ears. "I've never robbed someone of their free will before. It's been fun, Rusty. Perhaps we'll meet again in another life." Zekalov sensed Rusty's silent acceptance of his fate and heard the clone's mental urgency to proceed with the completion of his execution. Zekalov didn't have the chance to even blink when the unthinkable happened. General Grievous snarled with unrestrained fury and took 2 leaping bounds forward and lifted the clone high in the air by his throat. He reared a hand back with sharply pointed, duranium claws extended, no doubt intending to impale Rusty on them. He partially turned his head back to lock eyes with his son. "Clearly you've forgotten how to execute a prisoner without the aid of your powers. You've grown far too soft. Granting your enemies any mercy only proves that within you, there is a weakness that must be purged. The time has come for yet another lesson. Perhaps this demonstration will jog your memory." Grievous raged as he turned his full attention back to the clone. The cyborg Kalish never had the chance to visually impart the gentle reminder of what was required of the boy. Without warning, a loud, defiant scream ripped through the vast expanse of the room, surprising 2 of the 3 occupants. No. The next few minutes were a confusing blur. Zekalov was at first not entirely sure what truly transpired. He had the nagging feeling he did something terribly wrong. The young Kalish warrior was having trouble remembering all of the details at first, but he knew that they were sure to resurface in the future. He soon found himself running through the corridors of his father's flagship, pushing droids aside and shouting orders for everyone to move who were impeding his path as he dragged Rusty along with him. Within a matter of minutes, he shoved the handcuffed clone up the boarding ramp of the Dark Shadow and secured his prisoner. Wait, Rusty was handcuffed. When did that happen? Zekalov turned around when he heard the enraged roar of General Grievous. Something stopped him from fleeing. A whisper in the Force halted him in his tracks. Strangely enough, it did not feel as though it emanated from the dark side. He turned to see that both he and his ship were now surrounded by countless war droids and that his father was now standing a few yards across from him. He had no need to rely on the Force when it came to gauging his father's emotional state. Right now, the general was seething with near, unbridled rage. He stood with one blue and one green lightsaber activated, one in each hand, and narrowed his eyes on his son. Zekalov met his father's stare unflinchingly. Do you realize that what you've done is an act of treason? What you are doing is an offense punishable by death. Grievous snarled. For a moment the Kalish teen hesitated. He stared into his father's golden eyes, and for the first time in his life, he could see no affection, no worry, not even the slightest trace of caring within them. All he could see was hate, a bitter coldness, and a darkness of the like that he never thought was possible. What was worst of all, Zekalov could see no love, of any kind. It hurt him. His pain was so great that it felt as though a knife was plunged and twisted within his heart. It was as if the fatherly side within him never existed. Zekalov began to despair. Was there even the smallest degree of goodness left within General Grievous? Was the father he once glimpsed still alive? The young warrior remembered the rare moments in the past, when he knew for certain that his true father was still fighting for supremacy within the shell of General Grievous. Now as he gazed into General Grievous's eyes, it appeared that his true father had at last been slain. The hurt Zekalov felt quickly changed to a dark, burning anger. He stood his ground and took a few menacing steps forward with narrowed eyes of his own, though he did not draw his lightsaber. He released an enraged scream as he raved his grievances. I don't care. I hate Dooku, his master, and the Sith. I will no longer be their slave. We've discussed this long ago, boy. Now is not the time to act like a foolish child. You will either surrender yourself to me for due punishment, or what? You'll kill me. Zekalov interjected with an expression his father had never seen before. It was one commingled with grief, betrayal, hurt, anger, accusation, and despair. I would be forced to hand you over to the Count. Grievous finished his previous warning with a dark glare. His son's expression gave him pause as he considered the boy's words. In many ways he understood the conflict and rage that his son was undoubtedly feeling right now. That didn't pardon him for his detestable actions only minutes ago. His son had the audacity to use his Force powers to stop, subdue, and distract him long enough to escape from the prison block with the clone prisoner. It was not the first time that the general of the droid armies was on the receiving end of such tricks. Most were enacted by a Jedi's hand. His mind raced as he recalled the events that led them to this moment. Seconds before he had the chance to execute the clone, his son screamed in outrage. Force pushed him across the room, ripped one of the lightsabers attached to his hip armor via force pull before using yet another force power to slam the deactivated saber hilt, one of Grievous's hard-earned trophies, against a wall where it fragmented into unsalvageable pieces. It was exceedingly difficult when it came to taming the bloodthirsty beast within himself when something like that occurred. His son knew it best of all. Which led to the question, why had Zekalov done it? Did something happen on Korriban during Zekalov's mission that now led to this senseless act of rebellion? Under normal circumstances, such an offender would have been immediately eviscerated. It was always different with his son. The savage, animalistic side of Grievous howled in outrage, screaming for blood, demanding he act upon his raging impulse to kill the boy. What remained of his rational mind always saved the child in the end. His child. Ever since Zhikalov entered his life, something within Grievous began to change. It was something that the bloodthirsty general began to despise. It was a weakness. It took a while for him to recognize it for what it truly was. The long-lost part of himself that was thought to have been destroyed with Shilil's death and Grievous's subsequent birth was not as dead as he first believed. He was still reeling from such a discovery and was loath to admit that what he felt was true. Shilil, the true Shilil, had begun to re-emerge. It took some time for the general to come to terms with what was happening to him. He didn't want to accept it. Shilil was nothing but a shadowy ghost and had no place, no right to surface now. Grievous did everything in his power to rid himself of the loathsome distraction, but no matter how hard he tried, Shilil always found a way to remain. The conflict within him was becoming far too exhausting these days. Grievous theorized that Shilil first began to rise from the ashes the moment he first beheld his youngest son on the day that he found him on Yavin's moon. It was the boy who caused this. His son was the catalyst. Grievous could not understand how his child did it, how he found a way to see beyond the droid-like shell he currently inhabited, how he was able to reach beyond the cybernetic implants and other machine-like chips embedded within his brain and find what Grievous never could. Zhikalov found Shilil, the remnant of a distant past. The general growled at himself for allowing his mind to wander. He returned to the present and gave his son a hard stare. If you do not surrender yourself to me now, as Supreme Commander of the droid armies, it is my duty to report your activities to our overlord, Count Dooku. He will be the one to decide your fate. I know what he will do to me. Zhikalov responded softly. The young Kalish teen closed the distance between himself and his father and gazed deeply into eyes so identical to his own and seemed to be searching for something hidden within them. General Grievous deactivated the lowered lightsabers that were now hanging loosely in both cybernetic hands. All the rage and anger he previously felt melted away the longer he made eye contact with his son. Zhikalov's ability to disarm him with a simple gaze never ceased to amaze the general. The boy carried that charm his entire life, it would seem. Zhikalov remained silent for a moment, his lips pressed in a grim line, and appeared to be struggling with some sort of internal debate. At long last, he broke the silence. Father, something did happen on Korriban. Please, we must discuss it, but not here. Grievous dismissed all of the droids, ordering them to return to their original tasks, and clipped his lightsabers to his hip plating. Zhikalov locked the unconscious clone within his ship after reinforcing the restraints holding him and gave the droids two simple orders: guard the ship. Make certain no harm comes to my prisoner. The young Kalish warrior then proceeded to leave the hangar with his curious progenitor in tow. Grievous followed his son without question into his personal quarters. He watched with extreme interest as Zhikalov retrieved a small device from his desk drawer and switched it on. It was used primarily to scramble any listening tech, giving the duo complete privacy. What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room under any circumstances. Count Dooku must never learn of this. I prefer to keep it that way. I encountered something important while on the planet's surface. The Kalish cyborg would never admit it, but he felt a giddy sort of excitement knowing that seconds from now, he would possess vital intelligence, something that the Count would never have the pleasure of knowing. Zhikalov recounted his entire experience while on his Korriban mission. He told his father of the Force ghost of the Kalish Sith Lord, who claimed to be his ancestor. When the young warrior began to explain the particulars concerning Grey Jedi, Grievous was riveted. At first the general was completely opposed to the idea, until Grievous began to feel his hated foe arising, no doubt to challenge him. The father within resurfaced, the Shilil of old. Not the fearsome, bloodthirsty, merciless warlord he was currently renowned for. General Grievous did everything in his power to bury that part of himself. The old Shilil was weak. Grievous was now stronger than ever. He was the commander of a vast army, conqueror of worlds, and became both feared and revered by the mass denizens of the galaxy. He took pride in knowing that he earned second place on the Republic's most wanted roster. Grievous attempted to speak, to convey to his son both his thoughts and feelings concerning their current topic, when a hacking cough overcame him. He growled after he recovered to see that Zikolov was staring at him with round, tear-filled eyes. Grievous stared back. Why was the child looking at him like that? It unnerved him. "What?" he gruffly questioned. "I can feel you again," Zikolov nearly whispered with awe. "What do you mean?" Grievous narrowed his eyes as though afraid that the answer would be offensive. "That there is still some good in you. Earlier in the hangar, when you confronted me with your lightsabers, you looked at me as though you truly hated me. Everything we once had, when we were together before Count Dooku took me from you, I could no longer see in your eyes. The good things. You used to love me. Today I didn't see that." Zikolov struggled to hold back his tears, but for some reason lately it was becoming increasingly difficult to master and control his emotions. So he apologized. "I'm sorry, please forgive me. I know I'm not supposed to cry. Crying is a weakness. Warriors that do so are not worthy of honor." Zikolov averted his eyes before continuing. Sheilal wanted so desperately to tell his son that not everything he spoke of was true, but Grievous subdued and silenced him. For now. Grievous continued to listen with mounting worry. His son was hardly, if ever, emotional. "For the longest time, all I felt is hatred and rage. I'd forgotten what love feels like. I want to feel the good things again. Now you've shown me that I never lost them, that I still have a soul. If you carry even an ounce of love for me, you haven't lost it either. I want to choose my own destiny. Right now, I'm trapped, locked in a cage. I want to be free," Zikolov finished, barely managing to swallow the thick lump that formed in his throat. He felt a pain like no other come crashing down on his shoulders. The years he was forced to withhold his pain and grief finally surfaced. Grievous's first raging impulse was to harshly reprimand the boy and order the child to pull himself together. He was acting far too out of character. It was worrisome. What if Dooku found out? "Father, I'm no longer the son you used to know." General Grievous remained silent. He wasn't sure what to do, and for the first time since Zikolov entered his life, he didn't know what to say. "Father, I never wanted to change. To become someone I'm not. I have lost everything." Zikolov's voice cracked as he uttered following words that both versions of his father never wanted to hear. "You must kill me. It's the only way to save me, to free me. If only you knew what was coming. Dooku will find the dark sword I brought back from Korriban and force me to use it. In doing so, whatever goodness I still carry within me will be completely destroyed. My love for you will be purged entirely. I will in the end be forced to fight you to the death. I'll hate you. I don't want that to happen. But I've foreseen it. You will be the victor in that duel. My fate is to die. I have not seen any visions that suggest otherwise." At long last, the floodgates opened and Zikolov was reduced to heartbreaking sobs. Within seconds, he fell to his knees, no longer appearing as the merciless, Jedi-slaying, heartless Sith apprentice that he was supposed to be. He looked more like a small, vulnerable, helpless, little child. His body shook with partially suppressed sobs as he wrapped his arms around himself, the only form of comfort he could truly receive at the moment. Despite his usual stoic and emotionally reserved persona, for the first time since the discovery of his youngest son, it hurt Grievous's to see his child so pained. Even though Zikolov recently experienced a small growth spurt, his 14-year-old body was still small by far in comparison to the cyborg Kalish. The general reacted without thinking. He didn't realize that his next action would unleash the deeply ingrained paternal instincts of Sheilal, that for so many years he thought were non-existent, and in so doing, would create a catalyst that would determine both of their fates. A war that every sentient being in the universe shared. A war and struggle that Grievous had a difficult time waging. There was a choice that always had to be made: listen to your mind, or follow your heart? For the cyborg Kalish, his mind dominated every thought, action, and decision since the day of his creation after the shuttle explosion. The notion of a heart never crossed his brilliantly calculating mind. It was a weakness that he no longer carried. He had no heart. That was what he once believed. Now was a different story entirely. As he gazed down upon the boy, he realized that his son's welfare, no matter his age, always came first. He pulled out a small, mysterious metal cube from a hidden panel in the wall and examined it closely with a sharp eye. General Grievous stood paralyzed when he considered the great significance and future consequences that would ensue should he choose to follow through with what would either be considered a costly mistake, or the perfect solution. For a moment, that ageless war raged between General Grievous and Sheilal. A fierce battle between the bloodthirsty, heartless, hollow-shelled monster, and the noble Kalish warrior, the one who embraced fatherhood and loved his child more than anyone. The father who would stop at nothing to ensure that his son remained happy and healthy and safe. General Grievous roared in fury when Sheilal dared to challenge him. In an instant within his mind's eye, he was standing in a glowing white room facing his hated arch-nemesis. Both opponents wielded a lightsaber. It was always Grievous's weapon of choice. Now that Sheilal's swords were no longer his to wield, he too was forced to use one. "I didn't ask for your help. Go away." Sheilal rolled his eyes and fearlessly approached the cyborg Kalish as though the two of them were best friends, wearing customary battle armor forged by the greatest smiths on Kali. The sword sheaths on his back were empty. They disappeared the day Grievous had given his swords to Zikalov. Sheilal grinned as he met Grievous's angry stare. "What a wonderful pleasantry, it's nice to see you too." General Grievous snarled internally as he tried to remain dominant. A lightsaber duel followed. They crossed blades. "You are weak. You died long ago, you have no right to fill the boy's mind with foolish, archaic ideals that will only curse him, as it cursed you." Sheilal clashed against Grievous in response. "You wanted to believe that I perished the day you became General Grievous, you only made yourself believe that because you were afraid. If your overlords found out that I survived that explosion, they would have killed you. You know as well as I do that my ideals are not foolish. If you continue to thrive in darkness, the hate that has consumed you will destroy the boy in the end. I know Zikalov better than even you." Grievous continued the internal battle with dark ferocity. "You know nothing. I know my son. My son is strong. Stronger than you ever were. He doesn't need to be coddled. He is a warrior now. Hatred has kept him alive thus far. Do you desire to witness his demise because of your foolish arrogance?" Sheilal easily parried what was meant to be a killing blow. "You mistake arrogance for wisdom. You do not believe in love. You do not love your son, you no longer know the meaning of the word. You only see him as another one of your prized possessions. Do you want Zikalov to become just like you? Is this what you want for him? Look at him, Grievous." Grievous growled as he glanced down at the still weeping, pitiful form of his son. At first it disgusted him greatly. Zikalov was a disgrace and brought him shame. Grievous could see out of the corner of his eye, Sheilal shaking his head sadly in clear disagreement. But there was one thing that Grievous and Sheilal could agree on. The boy returned from his mission, changed. Did he really though? The more Grievous thought about it, the more he came to realize that deep within the child, he was still. Sheilal smiled, forcing Grievous to pause with his thought process. "Do you see him now? You never lost your son. Darkness and hatred did consume his heart for a time, but it was not to last." Grievous snarled with fury as he savagely clashed blades with Sheilal. The cyborg Kalish did everything in his power to defeat him. Zikalov will die if he does not return to his former ways. Hate is what makes us strong. Love is foolish. Look what it has already done to him. Sheilal slowly began to overpower his opponent. "Yet it was you who did everything you could to prevent the boy's demise while he trained in Dooku's fortress by sending in Senti 7. Whether you were ever aware of it or not, you allowed me to resurface, to help you save him. You never wanted to see the boy change, you liked him just the way he was. Now he desires to walk his own path, will you deny him that?" Grievous gave Sheilal a mental eye roll and growled deeply at him. "He has no choice. I cannot allow him to leave. The Jedi, the Sith, the Republic, The Criffing separatists. Everyone in the galaxy will be out to kill him, you stupid fool. Sheelal turned serious. He shared with Grievous something vital that for all these years, he happened to overlook. Do you know how Zekalov made it this far? It wasn't just because he followed Dooku's ruthless commands, it wasn't his strength as a warrior, or even his command of the Force. He did it for you. His love for you kept him alive. I know that you've always known this. Help your son, Grievous. Go with him. You know better than I what the boy's fate will be if you choose to ignore my words. Grievous snickered with dark amusement. Sheelal and Grievous paused in the middle of their duel. You idiot. I am the Supreme Commander, General of the Droid Armada. I cannot simply abandon my post. He doesn't need me. He has made it this far without me. Sheelal mentally pointed at Zekalov with a dark frown. The boy was still hunched over and his pitiful sobs continued unceasingly. He does need you. You and I may have very different views, but we are both of one soul, and I know that Zekalov needs us both. You say the boy doesn't need to be coddled? Then by all means, watch him suffer and take satisfaction with the knowledge that your inaction is the true cause for his prolonged pain. You will never be the father that he deserves. Grievous sneered at his hated rival and lunged for him. He did everything in his power to shove Sheelal down into the black, bottomless pit that his annoyingly righteous other half usually inhabited, and was stunned to see that the bottomless pit wasn't bottomless anymore. He could actually see where it ended. It was the size of a deep well. That was unfortunate. Sheelal was starting to infuriate him. Why couldn't he just die? He snarled and tackled his rival and began choking him. Sheelal raised a brow and smirked. We are one and the same person, Grievous, remember. You can't kill me without destroying yourself as well. Now who's the idiot? Grievous mentally growled as he released him and then began to pace within the confines of his mind, ignoring the fact that Sheelal was watching him. The cube was still in his hand. Even though this internal war seemed and felt as though they were trapped in an eternity, only about a minute or so passed by in real time. Sheelal sighed and rubbed his temple in frustration. You are wasting valuable time. How long are you just going to stand there with indifference and watch as your son cries himself to death? General Grievous released an aggravated growl. Shut up. I'm trying to think. Grievous and Sheelal knew every thought that the other could devise before consciously considering it. While it was true that Grievous's mind, his choices, and his actions were usually dominate, Sheelal was the one out of the two who carried what Grievous wanted so desperately to destroy. His heart. Grievous considered his heart to be nothing short of a weakness, for it led to emotions that were not fit for a separatist general. Those emotions made him soft and vulnerable. Many times Grievous listened to Sheelal, listened to his heart in the past, and made a few choices that he later regretted. He refused to be blinded by them any further. Those who were responsible for creating General Grievous did everything in their power to kill what was left of Sheelal and expected him to perform his duties with a sharp, intelligent, and focused mind. And to make decisions that for most would be considered heartless, he was programmed to believe that mercy was a weakness. As was the concept of love. This foolish notion that he submit to Sheelal and allow himself to feel love again, never. The cyborg Kalish was going to ensure that both he and his son were cleansed of such a useless sentiment. Sheelal approached Grievous and halted his pacing. Grievous, if you follow through with what you are planning, you will lose your son, for good this time. Grievous scoffed in response. I don't think so. The boy will only become a fiercer, deadly warrior than you ever were. His internal foe posed the one question that sealed both their fates. What will become of your son Grievous, should you allow your selfish pride to destroy his only hope for freedom? You made your son a promise years ago. Now is your chance to be the father you are truly meant to be. Grievous glared hatefully at his enemy and at last submitted, allowing Sheelal to briefly emerge in the hopes of comforting his son, but on one condition. Sheelal would remain lifelessly dormant and cease to haunt Grievous no more after interacting with Zekalov. Shelob told Grievous that he would try to hold true to his promise but could not guarantee that it would last forever. Shelob activated the hollow cube that for many years remained secretively hidden. He placed it down on the floor in the center of the room. Like an explosion, light filled the room and slowly dissipated to reveal a scene unlike any other. He inserted a small chip within his speech unit, one that would change Zikalov's life forever. Everything around them suddenly changed. The world around them shifted until they were no longer on the command ship. Shelob, no longer trapped within the metal cyborg body he currently inhabited as General Grievous, reached down and gently picked his son up from the cold floor and sat down on a nearby crate. He positioned the boy so that he was now sitting across from him. The ground quickly transformed into grass and the crate into a tree stump, as both father and son found themselves back on Cali. They sat beside a softly flowing stream and brightly colored flowers dotted the landscape. One of the flowers was within reach. Shelob picked one and chuckled as he showed it to Zikalov. The holographic flower flickered for a moment before resuming its natural function. Do you remember your first day on Cali? This flower made you sneeze, if my memory serves. Zikalov finally opened his eyes and was not prepared for what awaited him. He gasped as confusion all but consumed him while he took in his virtual surroundings. How can this be? We are on your warship. That was when Zikalov turned his head to look at his father, and couldn't believe his eyes. What he saw paralyzed him and he could only stare wide-eyed at the Kalish, not the cyborg, version of his father in awestruck wonder as he beheld Shelob in his former glory. Father? How is this possible? Are we dead? No, my son. We are far from dead. Zikalov's eyeballs nearly popped out of their sockets when he heard his father's voice. Not the gravelly, mechanical voice produced by General Grievous's vocabulator. His father's voice, a Kalish voice, was amazing to listen to. When Shelob spoke, his voice was firm, deep, authoritative, and yet still retained a great measure of wisdom and love. It was not at all like the gravelly, hard, icy, rough, mechanized, hateful-sounding voice of the cyborg generals. How is all of this possible? Shelob looked saddened and replied in a remorseful voice. I have kept and hidden a hollow cube that is now responsible for what you see and hear. Years ago, before my accident, I had it designed to act as a modernized AI unit, capable of interacting with my children while I was away on my missions. I gave the cube's designer specific instructions to preserve my voice, appearance, and collective knowledge within the matrix of the cube. So, why are you using it now? Why didn't you before? I originally intended to present the device to my youngest child, so that he or she would have the chance to know their father in the event I never returned. I never had the opportunity to bestow my gift to Adrical, who was my youngest child at the time, when the accident occurred. I never imagined it would eventually belong to you. Shelob smiled warmly. To prevent the cube's discovery and to save it from certain destruction should Dooku or his master learn of it, I had an unknown third party transport it to an anonymous safety vault on Tatooine. The one place I knew for certain, where it would never be found. I don't understand, why Tatooine? How did you know it would be safe there? Zikalov questioned as he stood up. Shelob chuckled humorously and grinned. It was pleasing to see that his son was thirsting for knowledge. Tatooine is a backwater world, one that is currently under separatist control. Dooku and his master are far too preoccupied attempting to conquer neutral or republic-controlled systems. What reason would they have to return there? Good point. One question though. How and when did you go back to retrieve it? I took a short leave of absence while you were training with the Count a few years ago. I knew that chances were slim that I would ever be granted the opportunity to give it to you, but secretly, between missions for the Separatists, I had this cube altered and extensively modified by a brilliant scientist on the planet Agamar. So, the modifications are responsible for making you look and sound like the original you? Zikalov cringed and visibly flinched as though expecting to see General Grievous reach through the beautiful illusion to strike him in rage. His father warned him many times in the past, before he even went to train with Darth Tyrannus, not to speak of the accident or his previous life. His father's eyes softened and he shook his head. "My son, you need to never fear me. Never again." Sheelal reached down and gently tilted the boy's chin up so that they were eye to eye. "You were right. You did feel me again. You did what Grievous never wanted. You awakened me. I embody his heart and what is left of his soul. For many years I slumbered, until the moment he discovered that you are my child. He's done everything in his power to destroy what's left of me. Only you can save him now." "Father, Zikalov's voice cracked as his emotions began to resurface. He embraced his father and was surprised when he realized that the embrace was one that he'd never had before, genuine, warm, true, loving. Given freely without any reservation, unlike the awkward, stiff, and unsure hugs General Grievous issued in the past. The hollow technology that was still active did wonders when it came to disguising Grievous's true body and true voice. Still, through it, he could feel traces of Grievous's duranium shell. "Never doubt my love for you, my son." Soon Sheelal began to smile sadly. "I'm afraid that the cube's generator is about to fail. It was originally designed for a one-time use, an added safety precaution should it fall into enemy hands. There is but only one way to recharge the power core. Go to Agamar. Find the scientist who created it. He has many aliases, the last known name was Miko. This is how I want you to remember me, not the creature that I've become." Sheelal gently grabbed Zikalov's upper arms and pulled him closer, his eyes turning frantic, as the beautiful scenery around them slowly began to fade and melt away. The illusion of his Kalish body soon gave way to his true, physical form as the intimidating, cyborg general. He could feel General Grievous pulling him back down to once more take supremacy. His Kalish voice faded out to be replaced by the gravelly, mechanized vocabulator. "I like you, have been conditioned to hate and show no mercy. That was never the life I wanted for you. You've shown me, my son, that love and goodness do still exist. I will need you to remind me again in the future." Then with one final flash, the hollow projector deactivated completely, bringing both occupants of the room back aboard the warship. Zikalov could see the cube sitting harmlessly on the ground a few feet away. He watched with extreme caution as General Grievous returned, the hatred in his eyes and posture erasing any traces that Sheelal had ever spoken. He removed the small chip that was used to complete Sheelal's illusion from his speech unit and crushed it between two fingers. The cyborg Kalish gave his son a dark glare and growled. "What happened never occurred. Forget what was said and never speak of it again." Zikalov reached down and picked up the cube and studied it closely, curiously. Grievous reached a hand out and nearly demanded that the boy surrender it to him. Something stopped him. At first he believed it was Sheelal. He growled angrily when he realized that the decision to allow his son to keep the cube was his own. Argh. Look at the damage that the weak-minded fool has done. A part of Sheelal's caring nature managed to linger within him. Grievous cursed him. He would never allow Sheelal to emerge again. Zikalov hid the cube within his own cloak and stared grimly at Grievous. "Now is the time for me to depart." Grievous snarled in rage when he made yet another decision, one that again was not influenced or enforced by Sheelal in any way but by his own choosing. The cyborg Kalish jerked his head sideways to glare at a wall and growled out his answer. "Go now. Before I change my mind." Zikalov nodded silently. In a way, he didn't want to leave, not after he reached his father. He knew that if he did not leave now, Grievous would hold true to his word and force him to remain. He fled back to the hangar with all haste. He boarded the Dark Shadow and fired up the engines. Less than a minute later, his ship jumped to lightspeed, leaving his father's fleet far behind him. Minutes into their flight, the clone regained consciousness. He looked around in apparent confusion. The last thing he remembered was Grievous intending to gut him. Then he heard a loud shout and lost consciousness. He groaned as he sat up. He was stunned when he discovered that the boy removed his restraints. He went up to the cockpit where Zikalov was adjusting instruments. Rusty wearily collapsed into the co-pilot's seat and glanced at the Kalish teen. There was a maelstrom of emotions whirling within him. He briefly felt a lust for revenge for the atrocities his team suffered and wanted to avenge their deaths. The former leader of Renegade's squad felt grief and guilt when he realized that the horrible end that befell his clone brethren was all his doing. If he'd just left the boy alone all those months ago, rather than seeking vengeance for a crime the child never committed, none of this would have happened. Soon those emotions abated. Thanks for saving me back there. Zekalov grunted in response as he finished one of his calibrations. Why are you allowing me to live? Zekalov glanced at him before continuing his current task. Because Rusty, we are going to work together. You and I have been branded traitors and will soon be hunted down by everyone in this pit-forsaken galaxy. Unless you have a death wish and would like to go your own way, do so. Just keep in mind that I've foreseen your future, Zekalov replied gravely. Rusty wasn't sure he wanted to know his own future. It was most likely going to end with death. Tiredly, he pinched the bridge of his nose and closed his eyes in deep thought. At last his curiosity won out and he asked the dreaded question. And what future is that? Finally, Zekalov turned all the way around to face him. If you choose to leave and strike out on your own, you will be slain by a Jedi's hand. Oh, that doesn't sound so bad, Rusty attempted to lighten the mood. Zekalov frowned and shook his head. I'm afraid it is. That Jedi will dismember your right hand, impale you, and then behead you. Rusty gave the boy an incredulous, horrified look. Please tell me that you're joking. You're just trying to mess with my head, right? The young Kalish warrior's frown deepened. Does it look like I'm joking? This is serious. That doesn't sound like a Jedi. That sounds more like. Rusty trailed off and clamped his mouth shut. He didn't want to anger the rather temperamental Sith apprentice. Zekalov caught on rather quickly, however. Like a Sith? Like me? Zekalov finished the clone's silent statement. Rusty leaned back against the co-pilot's chair and sighed. He closed his eyes. I suppose I'd rather be killed by a psychotic Jedi than by General Grievous any day. I suppose your death wish shouldn't come as of a surprise considering what you went through as a prisoner. Rusty's eyes flew open and he snapped at the youth angrily. Yeah, at your hands. You forced me to kill my own brothers. Zekalov's expression finally changed, surprising Rusty. I regret many of my actions. I was forced to commit dishonorable things in the name of a cause that was not my own. Forced to become something and someone I'm not. Forced to fight in a war that was not of my choosing. I am sorry for the deaths of your comrades. I hope that now you will understand why it had to be done. Rusty paused and studied him. The kid did seem truthful, maybe even slightly remorseful. That was odd. He stopped to think upon the boy's statement. At last, he believed he understood. The Sith apprentice promised everyone from the beginning that if they cooperated, they might receive a relatively quick end, and that Rusty would be the last to die. Once the boy had a change of heart, which truly confused Rusty, it gave the boy his only opportunity to get him out of his prison cell alive. Zekalov even went so far as to turn on his own father. What made you change your mind? To save me, I mean. Zekalov put his tools away and wiped his hands on a cloth. Frankly, because I need your help. You are the closest thing, the only person that I have for an ally. Of course, Zekalov was currently keeping Senti 7 in power-down mode within the storage unit in the aft of the cockpit. He already disabled and destroyed any tracking devices that were installed within him. Rusty noticed the young warrior's hesitation and saw the boy's conflict. Questions raced through the clone's mind that only hours ago, he never would have bothered asking. Had the boy's sinister and rather heartless actions this whole time been just an act? Did the boy ever have any friends, or at least one friend in all his life? In some form, was the young Kalish warrior as much a prisoner as he had been? Almost as if reading his thoughts, Zekalov continued. You and I have more in common than you realize. We are both fugitives. We never had a choice to walk our own path. We did not choose our factions, they chose us. I'm pretty sure that we were both born and trained since children to fight someone else's war and were expected to forfeit our lives for ideals that may not have been our own. Rusty's eyebrows shot up into his disheveled hairline when he actually realized that the boy was right. They were both kindred souls. Neither of them ever imagined that fate would lead them here. I'm sure you probably and understandably hate the very core of me, Rusty, but we both need to let go of our pasts. From this moment, you and I will have a clean slate. Right now, virtually everyone is searching for you, as they are me. If the two of us are going to survive, we need to work together. What do you say? Zikolov questioned with an honest, solemn face as he outstretched his hand. Rusty gazed down at the proffered, 4-digit prosthetic. Soon a ghost of a smile passed his lips, as he finally reached out his own. They clasped hands and both nodded, silently accepting the unforeseen alliance that fate yielded them. After they pulled away, Zikolov adjusted his Navi computer and set a new course. Rusty raised a brow. Where are we headed? Zikolov allowed a small grin to cross his face. We're going to your true home. The place that first yielded your bloodline. What, Camino? Rusty questioned worriedly. He hoped they weren't heading there. The Kalish boy's grin widened after their new course was confirmed. Far from it. Then where are we going? Zikolov turned his head and locked eyes with Rusty. With a confident smirk, he at last relinquished their destination. Mandalore.